go into real brief housekeeping so we can get on to the good content you all came here for. First, we want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors. Without them, our work would not be possible. And also our promotional partners. We try our best to provide resources throughout the state of California because we understand how critical it is to meet the need of all local governments, especially when it comes to energy efficiency and sustainable energy within the state. We also want to encourage you all to sign up for our upcoming webinars. As you can see, we have at least 4 overall. There will be 18. Our next one will be happening next week, and you can see the titles. So if there's anything here that sparks your interest, you can go directly to our website and register for those individual webinars. You most likely did so to attend this one. Granted, normally our forums take place in person. Just to 2020, that is not possible. So we're trying our best to create a space where individuals can network. So we created what we call the SEEC peer-to-peer network on LinkedIn. It is essentially a group of individuals can come together and network with your peers in the energy efficiency, renewable energy space throughout the state. So we really encourage you all to join that and make connections. You can join it by going to this link at the very bottom. We will also send a direct link to this LinkedIn group in our chat box. For Q&A, we ask for you to please use the Q&A function to submit questions to our panelists. That makes it easier for us to track the questions and ensure they get answered. Also, please feel free to use the chat box to engage with your peers here in the webinar. And also, if you have any questions for LGC staff, such as myself, Ryan, or Serena, please feel free to chat us. But again, we really encourage you to use the Q&A box in order to ask our wonderful and talented panelists their questions. And so I'm going to do a real brief introduction for today's panelists. We have Garrett Wong, who's the Climate Program Manager at the County of Santa Barbara. We have Alejandra Tellez, who's the Program Management Analysis at County for Ventura and 3C RIN. Lou Jacobson, who's the Director of Physical Services at Eureka City Schools. And Stephen Moss, who is a partner at M Cubed and also LGC's regulatory consultant. So I will let them take it away.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Tia. Thank you to LGC for hosting this, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today to listen to this webinar. We hope to provide a really exciting and interesting conversation for you. And before we do so, though, we want to make sure that we get a good understanding of who's in the virtual room and where you all kind of virtually coming from when it comes to regulatory engagement. So before we proceed formally, we're going to get started with a few poll questions, just again to get a sense of who's in the room. So if we can queue up the first one. The first one is, what sector do you represent? Are you a local government, state government? Do you represent an investor-owned or publicly owned utility? Or perhaps a regional energy network, community choice aggregation program, or special district? Are you from the educational sector, nonprofit, or for-profit sector? So please take a moment and input your option. All right, so it looks like most of you, over half are from local governments. We have a small portion representing state government. The second largest group represented here are nonprofit, and then we have some for-profit entities and a few from special district education, CCA, and publicly owned utilities and rents. And we still have some people filtering in. All right, well, thank you for participating. A few more follow-up questions. When it comes to your community's climate action and adaptation efforts, I'm going to have to force you to choose only 3. Which are the top 3 most important issues for your community? And this could be what's happening relative to the past recent events, or this could be what are the most critical areas for achieving your carbon reduction goals. But you must decide what are the top 3. A few more seconds. All right. Okay, so it looks like building decarbonization came out as the foremost issue, followed by closely renewable energy and transportation electrification coming in pretty much neck and neck, followed by energy efficiency. And then lastly, at the tail end, we have microgrids, PSPS events, and wildfire mitigation, all of which could also be really closely interlinked. So thank you for that. We're going to have a couple more follow-up. So what experience and familiarity do you have with regulatory engagement? Is it none, or is it just a little? You might receive some updates and some perhaps some summaries from a third party, or maybe you just read the news. More than average, meaning that you actively participate in some discussions to digest proceedings. Maybe you receive presentations. Occasionally, you may submit comments and replies, never usually on your own, but usually part of a group. Or you participate a lot in that you do actually have your own either internal or external regulatory staff or consultants, and you engage in proceedings that directly affect you. Okay. So we have a lot of dabblers, people who are a little, were lightly exposed to regulatory updates, usually getting summaries from third parties. There are a few of you that are more engaged than others and are actively participating in those discussions and maybe submitting comments. And there are fewer who are, who do actually have independent or have their own staff or consultants supporting them, and even fewer that have none at all. So that's good. So thank you for that. Panelists, just keep in mind that we largely have a group of local governments who are really prioritizing building decarbonization, renewable energy, and energy efficiency as a means of achieving their community's climate action goals. Although microgrids and addressing public safety power shutoffs and wildfire issues as relates to the energy infrastructure are still important. But that also a decent number of the participants do have some experience, perhaps mostly through information out interactions when it comes to the regulatory process. So we're going to kick it off, our discussion. And this is really going to be very different. We don't have a whole lot of slides. This is going to be a whole lot of technical detail about each and every individual proceeding. But we really want to impart to you not only what's happening recently, but also but also not only what's happening recently, but what are some of the what's some of the history and what is the context, right? So, what is the PUC and what does it do? The very basic question we want to make sure everyone understands. Next. And why should local governments and communities care, more importantly? And then what do you do? How do you get involved in these issues? And then my favorite question, why should you join the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition, the organization that we are all part of? So just a little bit about LGSEC. We are a network of leaders. We're a membership-based organization. We represent roughly over 40 different organizations, mostly local governments, but also some nonprofits, special districts, and for-profits. We're all mostly focused in the energy industry. And we primarily engage at the regulatory space before the Public Utilities Commission, and on occasion the Energy Commission and the ARB when appropriate. But we're one of the only voices out there when it comes to representing local governments on a consistent basis. And we will hopefully by the end of today convince you that not only is regulatory engagement important for local governments and communities, but that LGSEC is the right place to do it. So we're going to hover on this slide as we get more into our discussion. And when I say, looking here at these bullets that we'll get into more, the 2020 priority PUC proceedings, these are priorities for LGSEC. We try and focus on a handful of proceedings, but we definitely acknowledge and are active in other issues, which are listed below. But we also wanted to reflect on what our historical and current involvement has resulted in. Local government involvement in energy has really transformed the landscape of how California is achieving its carbon and energy goals. And so that's something important to keep in mind. So before, the first thing we're going to do, I think, is really just fundamentally just understand, what is the PUC and how does it work and interact with the governor, with the legislator, even with the Energy Commission. And I'd like to turn it over to Stephen Moss to kind of briefly answer that question. Stephen Moss is our regulatory economist for LGSEC, and he works to gather our comments and our perspectives that get ultimately funneled into our filings that go to the PUC and other regulatory agencies. So Stephen, can you provide us with a general sense of, again, what is the PUC? Why does it exist? And how does it interact with some of the other branches of the state government?
Sure. So thanks, Garrett, and hi, everybody. Glad to see you all. We have 110 participants. I think that was one of the questions that came up. As a CPUC is a more than 100-year-old organization, and it emerged out of concerns over monopolies, right? And a monopoly is theoretically something from an economics perspective has downward sloping marginal costs. In other words, it's something that can provide a service at a lower cost each time it serves another customer. And utilities historically have been monopolies because they have followed a spoke and wheels model. They have large power plants and they transmitted power over large pipelines to our homes and businesses and industries. As a side note, it's not clear whether or not utilities still meet the monopoly criteria of downward sloping marginal costs. And I'll touch on that very briefly in this little brief discussion. The CPUC is quasi-judicial, meaning it's not like a city council meeting where you can just kind of walk up and give your comments and walk away. There is almost always an administrative law judge, kind of a quasi-judge that's in front of participants, and they're paying careful attention to rules and procedures as to how to interact with the commission. Increasingly, that's softening, so to speak. That increasingly what we see, and those who are involved in this proceeding see, is that the energy division, the staffing of the commission, is floating ideas, and there is a much kind of looser process of submitting comments and having an interaction with the commission over these decisions. Still though, there is kind of a ballet that has to occur in order to participate. You have to submit things in a particular way and they're processed in a specific way. The CPUC interacts with the legislature in an oblique way. The commissioners are appointed by the governor and confirmed. Very frequently and increasingly, the legislature likes to direct the CPUC to do things. So what they'll say is, you have to have so many renewables, as we know, and the CPUC is left to try to figure out how to make that happen. CPUC is obviously very concerned about making sure that there continues to be reliable energy service and affordable energy service, and increasingly has its hands full in things that, and this gets to why local government, I think, finds this important, that are reaching into really what look like local government responsibilities. So while as before, as I mentioned, you had a power plant leading to a town that then maybe had another power plant, now what you have is fewer power plants leading to a dispersed system in which the legislature, the leadership of the state, and the CPUC is interested in shifting the way in which we actually use electricity and how we do. And that's where we get to these proceedings that are of keen concern to local governments: building decarbonization, microgrids, transportation electrification. These are built environment, transportation infrastructure issues that, because they're attached to the electricity structure, we're conveying electricity to them. And because it's essentially the only way that the legislature can figure out how to fund the transformation they want to make in terms of building stock and transportation and other things. Increasingly, utilities are responsible for doing things that maybe a local government would otherwise do, like electrifying its fleets or requiring some sort of permitting to decarbonize a building. So that's sort of a very round statement. We engage because historically it's required deeper expertise. You have to kind of have some technical chops to be involved with the CPUC. Frankly, that's becoming less the case, that the voices of local governments, because there is this nexus, this interaction between energy and community and municipalities, just pure advocacy is almost as important as pure technical expertise. But both is needed in order to help to guide the CPUC to places where we feel comfortable, that are sustainable, affordable, that work for local governments. So with that, I'll stop and give it back to you, Garrett.
Thanks, Stephen. I think one of the other important things to keep in mind that I tend to forget, or not forget, but we don't think about as deeply, is that the Public Utilities Commission is there for the utilities, right? And because there are it's a regulatory agency, that it only has the ability to regulate its regulated entities, and therefore it's the 4 investor-owned utilities that are the main players in the room, who are both not only they get to be on advocacy issues as well, and advocating for things that are ultimately going to regulate them, right? And so when you're not an IOU, you're largely an outside party to the process, trying to advocate for certain things that will hopefully benefit your community or benefit your industry, right? But I think it also shows that there's some inherent tension in the fact that as we're moving towards a more decentralized space of renewable energy, of distributed energy resources writ large, and transportation electrification, like you mentioned, the question I think comes, is the PUC, are IOUs really the right vehicle for achieving that, right?
It's a really good point, Garrett. And the way that the CPUC operates, exactly as you say, is that if there's a problem that they want to solve, quite frequently as directed by the legislature, say transportation electrification, their first question is, utilities, how do we solve this? Tell us how to solve it, because they are regulating the utilities. They're not regulating local government. which then immediately narrows and tunnel visions in the notion of how would you solve this problem? As an example, transportation electrification. You're not asking LA County or the REN or a CCA, you're asking the utilities. So they get the first bite at the apple. That makes it a little more difficult for entities such as local governments to have their say.
Right, right. We do have some questions trickling in. I think that affords us an opportunity to pivot a little bit. And I'd like to turn over one of this question to Lou. So Lou Jacobson, he's the Director of Fiscal Services at Eureka City Schools. Eureka City Schools is the only school district at this point who's a member of LGSEC, but we do have a membership category for educational institutions, and we would highly welcome and encourage educational institutions to come over and consider membership. But before that, Lou was also with the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, and to the extent that he's comfortable, I would like him to answer this question that's put forth. Does the CPUC have any authority over the CCAs, over the community choice aggregation programs?
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Wonderful. So this is a yes and no, and it also comes down to it depends on what space the CCA is operating within. Because the audience is largely interested in building decarbonization, transportation electrification, and energy efficiency, I'm going to keep this to the demand side, not really going into the procurement side. So if CCAs launch locally funded programs, the PUC really can't interfere, meaning that if they use locally generated ratepayer dollars to reinvest in their communities in building decarbonization, electrification, really anything they want that board approves, the CPUC kind of at a high level can't come in and say thou shall not provide rebates for electric vehicles or rebates that are duplicative to offerings that are being provided at the state level. Now, things change a little bit if that CCA elects or applies to become a program administrator, very similar to the IOUs. So right now, three immediate examples that come to mind are Lancaster, Redwood Coast Energy Authority, and RIN. Clean Energy have all, to some degree, engaged with the PUC to access ratepayer dollars to deliver energy efficiency programs. So as soon as you pull that trigger, yes, the CPUC does have regulatory influence over that CCA. However, it's really, it really boils down to that community's choice at that moment. And so in regards to the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, and I do know they have a couple employees on this call, they did elect become a PA, but they can also provide local incentives that value stack to those dollars being brought in through energy efficiency funds. So again, it depends. I'm keeping this high level on the demand side, but the more complex way of looking at it is, yes, certainly on the procurement side, and certainly on the energy efficiency side. Again, on the energy efficiency side, when that CCA decides to access those state dollars.
Great, thanks, Lou. And to provide a little bit of also historical context, because we have it here on our slide. LGSEC, we're just slightly more than a decade old as an organization, but where we really got our start was in coming around and convening to advocate for legislation that actually allowed for CCAs to come into existence. That assembly bill that was put forth and lobbied for was something that local governments had come together to advocate for, and it was a result of the successful passage of the CCA legislation that really created this idea that local governments working together and advocating to change state level policy is really critical and important. And it's also an investment that yields tremendous returns. If we talk about CCAs, obviously those are providing tremendous value to the organizations that have started them, to be able to capture ratepayer dollars that would otherwise be going to IOU shareholders, now coming back to the community under local decision-making and governance systems, some of which have community advisory committees. It's a really powerful tool to achieve a community's climate action goals. And I would say many of us municipalities did not have an inkling of what a CCA is or what it could be, really, until they really started to flourish in more recent years. Similarly, regional energy networks are another interesting facet of how local governments have become more increasingly involved, not only in the regulatory space, but also in delivering energy efficiency programs or delivering energy programs. And I'd like to turn it over to Alejandra, who's with the County of Ventura, to talk about that business case, that investment decision that they made to form the first new regional energy network outside of a pilot phase that originally only started with the Bay Area network, Regional Energy Network, and the Southern California Regional Energy Network.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. So this is so 3CREN. So it's 3 counties, right? Counties of San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura County. And what we decided, thinking back, I think it was the end of 2016. So getting involved in the PUC regulatory process certainly is a long journey, but it's a well worth a journey. So it started in 2016 when we kind of saw a small window open to submit a new business plan to start a REN. So the 3 counties kind of got together and discussed it, you know, our supervisors, our decision makers, and kind of see if that was it was a good idea, kind of good investment. And you know, like any local government employee, you know, elected official, decision makers are like, sure, why don't you try it, right? So we kind of got direction to go see what that was about. And what it started was, you know, a business plan, participating and the coordinating committee known as, you know, CAP's, and kind of presenting. And what that turned out to be was about a 3-year process, maybe, to becoming a REN. It was I think it was a very bold movement on our county side, because we kind of started on this journey without knowing whether we were going to be approved. We finally got approved in the end of 2018. So the 3 counties decided to make the investment, both staff time, and then we hired consultants to kind of help us to the regulatory process. It's very technical, and it was there's a lot of, you know, different rules that we have to follow. One of the things that was also beneficial is, you know, participating in, you know, entities like LGSEC and kind of getting the history. I think all 3 of our counties were new to the regulatory process. So having LGSEC and the other RENs to rely on was a certain help, right? As simple as, how do you file a proceeding? It has to be PDF-A, you know, getting a PDF-A. Sometimes it was a complicated process, there's a timeline. So from that to, like, you know, strict regulatory, like ex parte, you know, meetings, how do you set that up? You have to notice them first. So certainly having a group of members around was very beneficial and helpful. One of the great things about LGCC, how you mentioned, been around for a long time, and a lot of the PUC proceedings go on for a long time. So having somebody around that knows the history of when something got started, or some kind of way that it's been tracked, is certainly helpful for local governments who want to kind of jump in and get engaged. One of the great things that we saw with our REN, it was you know, people ask, like, how did you get your decision makers or your counties to kind of make that investment? I think, you know, all 3 counties kind of made a case for it, right? It's something that we need. It's ratepayer funding, you know, that we all pay in our energy bills, that for whatever reason, you know, we, you know, pay online and kind of don't pay attention to. And a lot of the times we don't see that coming back to our area. The utilities kind of, you know, run the programs and implement, as you know, as they basically fit, as they have to, you know, comply with rules and their cost effectiveness. But a lot of our areas were getting kind of left out of the mix. at the end of the process, we kind of went back and, studied, was it worth it? So I kind of went back and did the math, and for total investment, the 3 counties invested a total of about 142,000 for 2 years. So kind of turned out to me that maybe 47,000 each county, and then staff time. That's like a lot of money, right? Not all departments and divisions have that type of money to just say, sure, go spend on, on a regulatory engagement and see if you get approved. It's a commitment. I wouldn't call it a risk, obviously, because at the end of the day, we got an approved business plan and we got $48 million approved until 2025 out of that. So if you kind of look at it when when you're applying for a grant, you kind of like, let's see if we get it, right? And you make that investment, and you have a great application, and you go through the process and you wait. So I think it's just a matter of how we pitch it to our decision makers. PUC and ratepayer funding is usually something that not a lot of people know about. So you become the expert and the one that states your case about it. And that's, you educate those people. Well, all this money that's being, decided on at the PUC. There's, billions of dollars that are just kind of going up, and we kind of had no say in it, how it was being done and what programs were being implemented. So I think it was a great decision on our end to kind of go on this route. And now nowadays, that 142,000 seems like it was like a small investment to what we got out of it. Other than the funding, the money, the millions, which is great. That control to design your programs and implement them locally to meet your local needs. It's different when you come to your local stakeholders and local groups and say, hey, we're going to design a program. Like, what do you think? What do you need? What should we do? When you hear about, oh yeah, Director Stahl was here last month, I didn't even know about it. So it's a whole different scenario and different risk. It's hard to design a program. It's not easy, and can kind of get it out of the way. But it's very rewarding to be the one to kind of design something that it's going to be implemented in your cities and your counties. So I think as far as the new run in town, it was a good business case and a good investment that our 3 counties decided to embark on.
Thank you, Alejandra. And again, for more kind of context, how transformative really this is. Lou had previously mentioned becoming a program administrator of programs, particularly energy efficiency programs. And Alejandra mentioned the billions of dollars. And really, every year over $1 billion are spent on energy efficiency programs. And previously, earlier, before COVID and before the wildfires, there was a resilience bond that was being floated at by the governor and by the legislature. And unfortunately, that was not, that was shelved as a result of the recent events. And here, local governments are starting to elect to essentially start to siphon off this, I'm not going to call it a cash cow, but there's serious dollars that are continuously flowing from ratepayers to the state, back to the investor-owned utilities. And now local governments and communities are saying, we think we can do a better job and serve our communities in a better way, or serve communities that haven't been served. And so regional energy networks are an idea that local governments through LGSEC had put forth and said, what if local governments on a regional scale delivered energy efficiency programs, and delivered programs that utilities did not or could not offer to customers that were hard to reach, rural customers, low-income customers, customers that don't speak English. I'm sure if you have customers and constituents in your community, these are people that you want to reach too. And SoCal REN, which is based out of LA County, and Bay REN, which is based out of San Francisco. Those were the first 2 RENs that started as a pilot, and the PUC authorized these pilots. And just recently, the PUC turned around a decision saying RENs are no longer a pilot. They're no longer a concept. They have proven themselves and are now a permanent fixture of the energy efficiency landscape. And so that transformation over roughly a 10-year period, I think, is really a real testament to what regulatory engagement and local government advocacy can really yield. And we have to have the foresight and the ambition to really bring that to the PUC, because otherwise, without these ideas, they're going to constantly use the same tool for the same problems that they always try to fix, which is, again, working through their utilities. So thank you, Alejandro, for sharing on that.
Yeah.
Why don't we, because I think people are also interested in some of the current proceedings that are going on. Let's touch on a few of them and talk about how they're evolving and how they're affecting local communities and the ability of local governments to affect their climate action plans. So the first one is building decarbonization. So Stephen, would you mind providing a little bit of context of where we're at and where we're heading with this proceeding?
I think of the panelists, I might not, this is one of my weaker proceedings, so there may be someone better than I to engage in it. But conceptually, we all know is that the state and also the CPUC wants to move out of natural gas. So when people talk about building decarbonization, they're really the pressure is to be able to shift from appliances that are natural gas dependent, which tend to be heating basically, but other things as well, and into a kind of an all electric situation. And so what the commission has focused on, which is sort of it's normally what it does in these circumstances when it is trying to do something kind of new, is piloting ways of doing that. Like, how would you go about retreating from a system that is really natural gas dependent and replacing it? We also know that municipalities have made, many of them have stepped forward and said, we are no longer to allow natural gas hookups as part of new construction. And have done that kind of unilaterally or municipally specifically kind of thing. And where the proceeding is now is to start to kind of unravel, okay, we've been piloting these things. We've been seeing what technologies we might be able to put in place to replace natural gas. What are now the consequences to the grid? And how do we actually proceed in a more rapid fashion to get where we want to go? And I'll leave it at that and let others talk about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the broad brushstrokes are there. I think, again, we have legislative priorities that have been established, that have been kicked over to both the Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission to ultimately determine how both regulations as well as incentive programs are going to be designed and delivered to advance this transformation. And unless, again, other entities speak up for that role will mostly be going to the investor-owned utilities. The next item, which is microgrids, which is one that we were more intimately engaged in recently, is really kind of shifting the perspective, we hope, and how the PUC wants to commercialize microgrids. Again, following a legislative priority, the idea is to quote unquote commercialize microgrids and create regulatory and incentive structures that really advance them in ways that they're leveraging private investment and community investment. And so they're currently in a multi-phase proceeding, and they just concluded the first phase, which offered local governments quite a bit of resources, we hope, from the utilities, resources that previously weren't available, like having a local government specific portal for accessing data about certain transmission lines, vulnerable transmission lines, and having really custom and unique, or having custom and tailored service when it comes to program delivery for microgrids. We're now currently engaged in a discussion, or the proceeding is now engaged on, what kinds of tariffs ought to be considered when it comes to promulgating microgrids. And actually, during the time of this call, we actually do have some representatives from LGSEC speaking before Commissioner Batchter, and not all of us are able to be present, but this is a very active proceeding, highly technical, unfortunately, but something that's very important. The next one is PSPS response, and this one was interesting and complex. Obviously, a lot of us have been affected either personally or professionally by public safety power shutdowns. The way that they've been done, particularly last year, was not well done. And the PUC had sought to rectify that by creating more proactive planning, more proactive coordination and collaboration, making sure that they're covering all the different sectors that are affected by the energy system, and requiring, again, the IOUs to come up with plans, come up with communication protocols, come up with kind of war game exercises to run through scenarios in which a shutdown was implemented, and how would that be executed, how would that be coordinated and communicated with people who need electricity for life support, or with people who run emergency facilities, emergency operations, and the like. And so we only recently saw this decision in the spring, so we won't really know the results of all the outcomes until much later, unfortunately. The last one is transportation electrification, and just so I'm not talking as much, I'll turn it back over to Stephen to help provide a little bit of context on that one.
Yeah, so one thing you'll see is kind of a theme through all of these is that the PSPS and the microgrids, we're pressing up against the need for greater resiliency that is location-based. And so that's driving in the PUC to have to consider specific places in a much more robust way rather than the utility system-wide approach. So with transportation electrification, here again is a state mandate that we want to drive automobiles out of the gasoline, out of fossil fuels, and into electricity, which will be increasingly, as we know, non-fossil fuel based. And in order to do that, who do they have to turn to? Well, the utilities, they're in charge of electricity, but that drives the utility into places where really communities and local governments live, which, for example, is where might you put a bank of chargers so that is most convenient to a low-income community or to people who are purchasing or might be purchasing electric vehicles? How does that actually relate to your built environment? What do you do about parklets versus parking lots, and whether they're publicly or privately owned? All these issues are really local government issues, are bread and butter to local government. And so the argument in the case that we're bringing is, and we're very strong allies with CCAs on this, really who should be in charge of determining the way in which we roll out electrification, and how should the associated funds then flow? And both in terms of microgrids and transportation electrification, it will also emerge in building decarbonization. A central question is, who will be, in the parlance of the CPUC, the program administrator, who will really be in charge of planning and all the way into implementing a very large flow of funds to achieve the goal of, for example, transportation electrification. I'll say one more thing is that, it's clear to us in talking to our local government members and others is that not all local governments want to have anything to do with this stuff. Some of them want just for the charges to appear where they're needed, paid for by the utilities, and enable them to move on with whatever other plans they have around climate change. Others, they want it all. They want to be able to determine where these things go and how to go about planning for them and how the public that they represent us. Give it back here.
I think one of the quick comments, I think one of the things that you can hear kind of, it's that, you know, local governments, they're all different proceedings, right? So they all require different technical expertise. But if you think about it from a local government or a nonprofit or just, you know, just a resident, this is something that local governments touch. You know, power safety shutoffs, it has to do with health and safety. You know, we run our sheriffs, our police departments, our hospitals, microgrids, sometimes those go in fire stations. We have fleets for transportation, building decarb, you know, local governments can be the ones to start to decarb their buildings. So it's something that local governments touch on, and then maybe eventually that, you know, they partner with nonprofits. So it's very, like you said, it's something, it's beneficial that local governments need to be engaged because decisions are being made without a local government voice or a nonprofit voice at the PUC. So they're very different technical wise, but they all relate to the work that local governments and local decision makers do. So I think that's another reason why we need to be engaged, even if we're engaged in just listening and don't want to be part of it. We're like, if some governments are like, yeah, we're okay with the way Edison's doing it, but at least you know how it's being done, and you're listening from who's making that decision, as opposed from somebody say like, well, we were told to do that. So I think either way, if you want to be engaged or not be engaged, just listening, I think it's also beneficial.
Yeah, Lou, can you touch on specifically, you know, how you kind of representing a school district and B, a very rural community, how you see these issues touching on your, you know, your core business function of providing education?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I wish I could take a picture and show everybody what it looks like outside my window right now. I think as we face increasing climate impacts, even up here in coastal Humboldt, we're being impacted by fires. So our streetlights are still on, our wall packs are still on. So all of this very much impacts our core mission to deliver education to our youth here in Eureka. And it all fits together. And so if we have a PSPS event, can we feed our most at-risk youth? We could last year, but it was quite challenging. What kind of solutions are in place? So the microgrids. Then building decarbonization is a interesting intersect between kind of the financial side of all of this, the infrastructure side of all of this, and core services. So you think about aging school infrastructure and really just aging local government infrastructure and combustion appliances and ventilation in the COVID era, it all fits together. So we were saying, look, you know, to bring children back, to bring our youth back, to bring our teachers and classified staff back, we have to provide a safe environment. A big part of that is ventilation. When we're looking at combustion units, we also have to look at ventilation. So by looking at fuel substitution measures, I'm going to say that broadly as it relates to building carbonization, there is an intersect here that really allows our team to engage in this conversation and link it to our core services. So we have to provide a safe workplace, safe learning environment. Having power on is critical. And then making sure that we can actually get kids to and from school. And so right now we are pursuing a microgrid. Now it's a single service point microgrid, so I'm not sure it really fits into my personal definition of that solution. Nonetheless, if we're successful, and we're successful at getting additional dollars through the Energy Commission, through the school bus replacement program, we may actually be able to deliver a vehicle to building solution coupled with a solar project paid for through the Energy Commission's ICA educational loan, which is a 0% loan funded and administered through the Energy Commission. and hopefully a battery energy storage system funded partially or in full through the self-generation incentive program, equity resiliency funding. It's a little bit of a stretch being a school, but we're going to go for it. And if we can do that, we will have active school buses, at least one running route. So from a school perspective, it all fits together, but I might be the only one on here representing the school. But I think you can level this up and say, look, there is a core business case to bring to your admin team, to bring to folks in roles such as mine, which, you know, my day job is to ask the question, does this make financial sense to our district? And to our taxpayers here paying for a lot of this stuff. Sometimes it does. Other times it's only through incentives and making sure that we partner with the right organizations. So as you're looking at these different proceedings, as you're looking at how you lay effective climate action plans, resiliency plans, energy action plans, think about your stakeholder groups. I think the first question I would ask is, do you have a local community choice aggregation? And what are they doing in this space? And so I want to, you know, provide a shout out to Mike Avcali, to Patrick Owen, to Marianne Bithell, and the whole Energy Authority team. They have something called a public agency solar program. I call it public agency solar and storage program, but effectively they've given us the technical assistance to move this work forward. They helped us apply to the ECA Ed program. They've really been a champion up here. And I know there are many CCAs out there that are doing similar things. So reach out to them, see what kind of services and support they may have for you as a local government. I want to unabashedly support and advance the Energy Commission's ECA loan program for local governments. This is a 1% loan for CSDs, for municipalities, for counties. It's not quite as good as what we access through the educational path, but the way they've amortized the loan will lead in most cases, you know, assuming a lot of different factors, a revenue positive project, solar project or energy efficiency project in year one. Now, I'm greatly generalizing that. Your results will vary. But I do recommend looking into that, because when you look at the way the Energy Commission structures these loans, in most cases, you should expect them to be revenue positive. So it really opens a new path forward to really go forward without the PUC. Because at the end of the day, when you think about what's going on at the PUC, particularly on demand side programs, one of their core missions is to deliver, or core part of their mission is to deliver affordable utility services. And I'm not going to wonk out. For those of you who have heard me speak before at SEEC events, I tend to like to go down the total resource cost pathway, cost effectiveness calculations for program administrators. I'm not going to go there because it's like deja vu. It's a year later, but the same issues. But do know that total resource cost or cost effectiveness, cost to the ratepayer, is a huge barrier in energy efficiency and building decarbonization and delivering services. Coming back to Alejandra's point, I do want to note that the regional energy network path to become a program administrator does not have to adhere to the same cost effectiveness requirements as program administrators, be it a utility, an IOU, or a CCA. So support your local regional energy network, support your local CCA, sidestep the PUC where possible and go straight to the Energy Commission for these loans. There are different mechanisms out there, but it may take a little bit of elbow grease. And there is a business model there to take to your admin team, to your fiscal folk. Even if it's not aligned to your core mission, you can get there. And you can always reach out to me if you'd like, and I can help you craft that narrative and how to actually align this type of work to your core community services.
Awesome, thank you, Lou. There's a lot there to pull from, but you know, you did touch on cost effectiveness, which is an issue that does affect primarily energy efficiency programs. And I think it's time for us to pivot towards some questions that have been put forth to us. And I'd like to start with one, which does kind of get at that. So how do we know these changes will help everyone? especially the low-income sector. Not everyone can afford a new electric vehicle, therefore charging stations will only benefit those who can afford a new electric car. So, I think, from the energy efficiency space, what Lou had spoke to in terms of total resource costs and this cost effectiveness, generally we know it's harder, it takes more time, right, to reach people who are not historically been reached, to reach people in a language that they're comfortable in, renters, low income, rural. These are all challenging sectors to address, and especially if they're all kind of meshed into one. There's essentially no guarantee that these people will be reached. But with a regional energy network, again, that provides more local support, more local staff, more local program design ability to really target those sectors specifically, because they're sectors that aren't really being well served by the IOUs. When it comes to the transportation electrification issue on that subject, that is something that we're very cognizant of. We know electric vehicle electrification has largely been a luxury, and because it follows the property owner, right? The property owner is the one who gets to own and operate their own charging station and invest in their property to get a charging station. Not everyone owns property and has the luxury of doing that. So the whole transportation electrification framework that's being designed by the PUC, from our perspective, really needs to hold that truth up to light, and we can't just expect that providing an incentive or even an added incentive for low-income neighborhoods or disadvantaged communities is necessarily going to get more people buying electric vehicles and charging stations. Because it also requires that you have to have the upfront cash to do the project, and the technical wherewithal to do it. So there's a lot that's left to. There's a lot that needs to be improved upon when it comes to program design, program delivery, and the regulations that spur those programs to really make it happen. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in too and just say that from a personal perspective, I don't believe this is all going to be resolved by the PUC. To the commenter's question and concerns, absolutely. I think it's even punctuated more so in rural communities where range anxiety exists and how you build out that infrastructure. I don't think relying on the PUC to resolve equity issues is going to get us as a group to where we want to get. So I just really want to kind of say, reach out to your municipal utility districts, your CCAs, your regional, air quality management districts. There are solutions out there, but equity will be an omnipresent issue, whether you're talking about rural ratepayers, socioeconomic dividers, racial dividers. It's real.
Our next question was one that was put to us earlier. It says, can you provide any context or information about the recent headlines about changes in CPUC leadership? Do these changes impact other sustainability efforts, and who are CPU staff responsible to? So I think, what this question is getting at was a recent firing of a CPUC staff person. There were two sides of the story. One was that there was some perhaps improper hiring practices that this person had engaged in. The other was the individual's side of the story, which they felt that the PUC was not fully enforcing accountability, primarily through fees and fines on the IOUs when it came to some of their wildfire issues. While I won't necessarily comment on the particulars of that, I think what we try and do always is trying to hold both sides accountable, whether it's the IOUs or the PUC, in terms of reminding the PUC or the IOUs what the commitments are, both legislative intent or regulatory intent, and making sure that ultimately what gets implemented and what are the outcomes are held back, are brought back before both sides. I do want to recognize we're at 12 o'clock, but this is supposed to go until 12:15. We do have a few more slides and a few more questions that we'd like to answer and welcome some more discussion. We have someone who has raised their hand, and I would like to see if Alejandrina Baldwin either would like to speak in person or speak on the phone or just chat her question. If we can unmute her. Alejandrina, if you're there, I think you have the ability to unmute yourself and speak directly to us.
Sorry, I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to Jessica Sitaros, who put in some responses to a question or to a comment about low income and electric vehicles, saying that that at least in the South Coast Air Quality Management District, that there's a replacement program for vehicles, particularly for low income folks. You can get $9,000 to trade in your gasoline vehicle for an electric vehicle. And she said many municipal utilities offer EV rebates as well, as it's made really affordable for low income. Municipal utilities are a different entity, not regulated by the IOUs, but I think perhaps MOUs, particularly some of the more progressive ones, do provide a great example of what we would like to see more out of our investor-owned utilities. One more question. What role can the private sector clean energy companies, either consulting firms, equipment suppliers, financing contractors, play to support local government advocacy?
So I think especially I think for us in the Central Coast, I think it's a huge role. I think we tend to either we have great consultants and great partners, but I think we lack the local knowledge of somebody local in the Tri-County area or in the rural communities that knows the PUC kind of structure and knows what's going on. The supply maybe it's not here. We have to go to the Bay Area or LA County, which is good. We want to support the private sector clean energy, but I think kind of increasing that local knowledge is always a great, especially for rents. We're trying to implement a local program and we do put out RFPs and kind of seek out information, but we have seen kind of the lack of local companies, entities that have that diverse knowledge about everything PUC, renewable energy efficiency. So kind of building on that sector would be great, away from Bay Area and LA. So, which is great, but we need to kind of have it be statewide.
Yeah, and I'll comment on that question and also the commission question. The CPUC really has mission impossible. They're in a position to have to try to drive what is a revolution in a very short period of time in our energy system with kind of a very thin authority over the utilities and implications to local governments and CCAs. And they're just like the bureaucracies, we're all working in. They're headed by commissioners who are temporary at, years, decades, with a permanent bureaucracy which is struggling with how to interpret what this temporary commission wants to do. But all that said, there is every indication that the commission and its staff want to achieve these goals. And that gets into the question about consultants in the private sector. There is this tension between local government's capacity to do something and their desire to do it. And you even take a microgrid. A microgrid is actually a very expensive solution to a resiliency problem, particularly as currently conceptualized by the commission as an add-on, not a part of the grid. And consultants, and we saw this in the microgrid proceeding, can be very helpful, even as part of advocacy efforts, in helping local governments and the commission understand, well, how do these things really fit in? And more importantly, how do we make them even financially sustainable for a local government to support? Because local government doesn't have a microgrid engineer on staff. They don't know. They don't have a microgrid financing specialist on staff. So here, this is a missing piece where I think there's a very important role that can be played by the private sector.
And I do agree. And then I'd also add, building on both what Stephen and Alejandra said, is that on the public side, look for those requests for qualifications, RFOs, RFIs, respond to those, engage with your third-party nonprofits like LGSEC, or on the school side, the California Association of School Business Officials. I think a lot of support can be delivered through these nonprofit agencies with local government membership and government membership. I do see that as being really effective. As far as the competing priorities, totally agree with Stephen's perspective. I would come back to the CCA path as well, of just saying, look, the PUC moves slowly. And there's good reasons for it. And I think we should support effective stakeholder engagement. I think the CCA side of the solution can effectively get there at the same, under the same paradigm, meaning, hey, let's have that stakeholder engagement, but it occurs with your local elected officials, and it may happen quicker. So looking to your CCA for leadership on some of these issues in parallel and in conjunction with the PUC may be an effective path forward. Of course, if you don't have a CCA operating in your communities, look at that model, assess it, go back to what Alejandra had mentioned on the REN in regards to the business model, and see if it holds water.
Thank you. We just have a few more minutes left, and I want to make sure we get through the rest of our slides. So if you could go on to the next one. So we've talked a lot about LGSEC as an organization, and you want to make sure that you leave at least understanding what the benefits are of membership. We help shape statewide energy policy and the way that it gets funded. And we like to try and direct that as much as possible to local governments to build capacity, to make sure that resources are going where they haven't traditionally flowed before, and making sure that we're equipping communities as much as possible to, again, be a part of the California's climate and energy future. We're providing opportunities for sharing technical expertise and best practices. We do that through in-person forums like the one pictured here, but we also have a member portal, and we've been also doing webinars for our members. And really it's this cross-pollination that helps advance our collective knowledge. We also provide frequent regulatory updates, which are really in the details of the proceedings as they're happening, and providing opportunities for all of our members to actively engage in these proceedings, provide their perspectives, provide their ideas and their needs. I mentioned the forums and the online resource. Next slide. So if you're wondering, how to sign me up, here is our current due structure. We try to make it as accommodating as possible for different entities. We do want to recognize that different communities have different abilities to pay. And so depending on whether you're located in a low-income community or a disadvantaged community or a hard-to-reach community as defined by the PUC, we are flexible. We want to make sure that we're working with you to find something that's reasonable. But again, going back to the investment, we feel that, the time and money that's spent with LGSEC pales in comparison to the dividends that get paid out through the CCAs and the RENs, and hopefully the transportation electrification framework plans that get built and designed with local governments in mind. This is a long game that we play, and we really try and pull the arc of climate and energy policy towards local decision makers as much as possible. Next slide. So we're governed by a board of members, of which I am the chair of, and I believe most of our members can become a board member. So we invite you to consider membership. We're grateful to have LGC, the Local Government Commission, manage our coalition. So thank you to Tia and thank you to Sabrina, who really provide us really great support in making sure that we're able to do the work that we'd like to get done. I encourage you to visit lgscc.org to learn more, or please contact myself or Lou or the people that you see here for any follow-up. There are a few questions left remaining that may not have been directly answered. But we can follow up offline about those. So I'll pass it back over to Tia and Serena to close it out, but really want to thank everyone who joined us today for this call to listen to our pontification, and hopefully you see what we see and are interested in not only just joining LGSCC, but regulatory engagement, and why it's really important to addressing our local challenges through our local climate action plans. Before we close out, we do have one final poll, somewhat of an exit survey. So if you please bear with us, just want to ask, how important is regulatory engagement in your mind now that you've heard what you've heard to achieving local climate action and adaptation goals? All right, so hopefully we've had a mind shift, hopefully, to somewhat to critically important. And I think we've done our job then for this panel. And again, thank you everyone who participated and who offered questions and comments. Thank you to the SEEC program for allowing us this opportunity to put this information before you.
All right, thank you again for everyone attending our forum. We do have upcoming webinars. They are shown on the screen. Hopefully you're still able to see my screen. We're also going to be sending a direct link in the chat asking you all to fill out a post-webinar survey. We're trying our best to make sure the content we're providing through these webinars is something that local governments are actually finding useful. So please fill out that survey. That feedback is very helpful and critical for us. Also, thank you again for everyone coming to take the time to attend this webinar, especially with the wildfires and the safety impacts they're having on our communities throughout the state. I just really want to recognize that this is a very difficult time, and just thank you for being here and working so hard to make our state a more resilient place. I hope everyone's able to stay safe and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.